He told her to know her worth. She did. Months later, she walked into the county assembly as Lady Verity of Ravensden, his equal in rank, his neighbour in land, and the owner of the boundary he had stolen from her godmother for 70 years. He came to her gate. She received him in her library. She accepted his apology. She offered nothing more. The terms of what came next were entirely hers. The morning Verity Davenport rode out toward the village. The mist had not yet lifted from the low fields, and the gravel of the drive lay dark with the wet of the night. She wore her grey riding habit because grey was honest, and she did not believe in dressing for occasions she had not earned. The mare was steady. The purse at her belt held 3 coins and a folded list, and the list was the reason she had risen before her aunt could intercept her with a fresh round of opinions about marriage prospects. She was 22. She had been told several times in the last year that she had been 22 for too long, and the duty of a young woman of modest fortune and reasonable face was to convert that face and that fortune into a match before it was too late to convert anything at all. She had her own opinion about it. She kept it to herself. The road from Mere Cottage descended in 2 long curves toward the river, and the river ran beneath the stone bridge into Hawthorne village, and Hawthorne in April was the quiet, practical place it had always been. A baker, a smith, a draper, a coaching inn with a board outside that listed the morning's posts. She tied the mare at the post by the inn. She checked the list. She went into the draper's first. 3 miles to the west at Westmore Park, Adrian Westmore had been awake since before 5. He preferred the hour before the household had fully assembled itself. He took his coffee in the small library that faced east, and he read the steward's reports while the light came up across the lawn. And he did not speak to anyone for the first 90 minutes of the day, which was a discipline he had cultivated since the death of his elder brother had made him the Duke at the age of 26. He was 31 now. He had grown into the title the way a man grows into a coat that does not quite fit, by wearing it long enough that the shoulders gave way before he did. The reports that morning were ordinary. A drainage matter on the South Tennant farm, a bill from the carpenters for repairs at the mill, a short note from his sister Honor, written from London, informing him that she would arrive at Westmore Park on the 18th, and that he should make no plans for that evening because she had several, and they all involved him. He set the letter aside. He drank the coffee. The clock in the corner struck the half-hour, and a single starling on the windowsill performed a complicated trill at the rising sun, and he thought, as he sometimes thought, that the years went by quietly and consistently, and never asked him whether he had wished them to. By 9:30 the village square was busier. Verity had collected her sister's hair ribbons from the draper, and the seed packet for her aunt's herb garden from the seedsman, and was waiting at the bookseller's for a pamphlet ordered 3 weeks earlier, which was, the bookseller said, definitely on its way and might be in by Tuesday and might not. She accepted this with the calm of a woman accustomed to the relationship between Tuesdays and books. She came out of the bookseller's into the sunlight and stepped to one side to allow a wagon to pass, and very nearly walked into a man coming out of the coaching inn at the same moment. He caught her elbow with the practiced reflex of a horseman who is used to steadying things that are about to fall. The grip was brief and entirely correct. She looked up. He was very tall. He had the carriage of a man who had learned where his shoulders ended and rarely needed to recheck. The coat was dark blue, well cut, not new. His eyes passed over her with the quick assessing attention that costs a man nothing and tells a woman everything about how she has been catalogued. "Forgive me, madam," he said. "Forgiven, sir," she said. He inclined his head. He stepped past her toward a carriage waiting at the curb with a Westmore crest on the door, and a coachman who touched his hat with the alertness of a servant who had been wondering where his master was. The carriage rolled away down the high street toward the Bath Road. She watched it go for the length of perhaps 2 breaths. Then she went on to the inn to collect her mare. She did not know who he was. She thought distantly that he had the air of a man who would be unpleasant to argue with and useful to have on one side in roughly equal measure. She filed the impression away with the other small observations of the morning and rode home to Mere Cottage by the lower road, and did not think of him again until her aunt mentioned 4 days later, over tea, that the Duke of Westmore had returned from London, and that Aunt Felicity Davenport had decided that Verity was, on the whole, going to call at Westmore Park before the week was out. The arrangement had been made by Aunt Felicity, which was to say it had been made over the heads of every party involved, with the cheerful, tactical confidence of a woman who believed that introductions were a public good, and that the inconvenience of those introduced was no impediment to their distribution. She had written to Lady Honor Westmore, who had been her schoolfellow at Mrs. Pellet's seminary in 1791, and Lady Honor had written back with the polite vagueness of a woman who could neither remember Felicity Davenport with any clarity nor refuse her with any grace, and Aunt Felicity had taken the polite vagueness as an invitation, and Verity, who had been told what was happening only on the morning of the call itself, had put on her best afternoon dress, which was a soft cream muslin, and her mother's coral cross at her throat, and had climbed into the carriage with the composure of a woman attending an appointment she had not requested. "You will be charming," her aunt said, as the carriage rattled up the Westmore Drive between rows of elms still bare in their April. "You will be modest. You will allow me to manage the conversation." "I will be myself," Verity said. "Whether the rest is necessary, we shall discover when we arrive." Aunt Felicity did not hear her, which was, Verity had observed, the way her aunt heard most things she did not wish to hear. Westmore Park was a long, low Palladian house in the local stone, built in 1722 and never quite finished according to the original drawings, which Verity knew because her father had once been employed in the textile trade with a cousin of the architect, and the family had a copy of the rejected plan hanging in the back hall at Manchester. She noted, as she stepped down from the carriage, that the south wing had been completed at last, and not in the original style. She noted the rose beds. She noted the cracked corner of the lower terrace flag, which had been mended and mended badly. She noted these things automatically, the way she noted the price of cloth and the temperaments of horses, and she filed them away. They were shown into the morning room. Lady Honor Westmore was tall and dark, and had the elegant, easy stillness of a woman who has decided some years ago that she would no longer hurry on anyone's account. She greeted Aunt Felicity with the polished warmth of 40 years of practice. She greeted Verity with a real look, which was a different thing entirely and indicated chairs. "My brother will join us shortly," she said. "He has been with the steward all morning, and is, I am afraid, not at his most companionable." "We shall not detain him," Aunt Felicity said. "We came principally to call on you." This was untrue. Lady Honor smiled. "He came in 7 minutes later. It was the man from the village." Verity registered this with the precise, quiet attention she brought to important information, and gave nothing of it to her face. He had not registered her. He had no reason to. The interruption outside the inn had lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and she had been one of 100 small obstructions in the course of his morning. He bowed to Aunt Felicity. He bowed to her. The bows were correct. "Mrs. Davenport, Miss Davenport, forgive my delay." "Your Grace," Aunt Felicity said with the breathless gratitude of a woman who had not been spoken to by a duke since 1804. He sat. Lady Honor poured tea. The conversation began, as such conversations did, with the weather and the road and the difficulty of the post, and Aunt Felicity, having waited through the requisite preliminaries, moved the talk by degrees toward her real subject, which was that her niece had been kept too long in the country, and that her niece's accomplishments deserved a wider audience, and that her niece, in short, was the sort of young woman whose qualities a man of discernment would do well to consider before they were noticed by London. Verity drank her tea. She did not look at Lady Honor. She did not look at the Duke. She looked at the spoon on the saucer, which was old silver and very fine, and waited for the moment to pass. It did not pass. "Mrs. Davenport," the Duke said when her aunt had at last reached the natural end of her promotional period, "you are, I am sure, an attentive guardian of your niece's interests." "I do my best, Your Grace." "Then permit me to be of service to those interests by speaking plainly." He set down his cup. "Westmore is a house with certain expectations, and the connections it forms must reflect those expectations. I make no judgment of your family or of your niece's qualities, which I have no doubt are considerable. But the consideration you appear to invite is not within my gift, and I would do you no kindness by leaving the impression that it might be." Aunt Felicity opened her mouth. Lady Honor said very quietly, "Adrian." He did not glance at his sister. He looked instead, for the first time fully, at Verity. "Miss Davenport," he said, "know your worth by all means, but know it accurately. It is not, I think, the worth that is asked of this house." The room held very still. The clock on the mantel marked the half-hour with a small, thin chime. A coal in the grate shifted and broke. Lady Honor's hand had gone to her throat in a gesture so brief it could be denied later. Aunt Felicity had the colour of a woman who has been told a thing in a room she cannot leave. Verity set down her cup. She did not speak. She rose. She made the curtsy. It was a perfect curtsy. The depth and duration calibrated to the precise inch. The kind of curtsy that acknowledged rank fully and conceded nothing personal whatsoever. She held it for the exact correct number of seconds. She rose. She said, "Lady Honour, Your Grace, thank you for the tea." She walked out of the morning room before her aunt had risen from the chair. She was in the carriage by the time Aunt Felicity caught up to her, and she handed her aunt up with the steady hand of a woman who had been managing rooms since she was 15, and they were down the Westmore Drive and through the village and back at Mere Cottage before Aunt Felicity had quite recovered her power of speech. Verity took off her bonnet. She climbed the narrow stairs to her own room. She sat down at her writing desk, and the light from the western window fell across the surface, and she saw, as she had seen for 2 weeks without seeing, the unopened letter on the corner of the blotter. She had assumed in November that it was a note of condolence. Her godmother had died in October, and the letters of condolence had accumulated, and she had answered most of them and set the rest aside, and this one had been set aside. She picked it up. She read the seal. It was not a condolence, it was from a solicitor in London. She broke the wax. The letter ran to 4 pages. The signature at the foot was Mr. Henry Pemberton, of Pemberton and Hollis, Lincoln's Inn, solicitor to the late Lady Marguerite Ashmore. Lady Marguerite had been Verity's godmother and her father's elder cousin, and she had been in her time one of the more singular women of the gentry of Somersetshire. Never married, well read in 3 languages, a patron of 2 charities, and a thorn in the side of 3 bishops, and the holder by an old grant of Charles II to her great-great-grandfather of the manor and lands of Ravensden, together with the courtesy title of Lady of Ravensden, which had been used by every holder of the estate since 1672, and acknowledged at court since 1689. Lady Marguerite had no children. She had had, however, opinions, and the opinions had crystallized in her last will, drawn up with Mr. Pemberton in the spring before her death, and witnessed by 2 members of the household, and lodged on the 17th of April 1812. The will, in its essential clauses, left Ravensden Manor and the courtesy title to her goddaughter Verity Davenport, on 3 conditions: that Miss Davenport take legal possession within 6 months of being notified, that she remain unmarried at the moment of taking possession, so that the estate vested in her own name and not a husband's, and that she reside at Ravensden no fewer than 8 months in each of the first 3 years. Mr. Pemberton apologized in the 3rd page of the letter for the delay in writing. There had been a complication regarding the boundary records, which had been entangled with a neighbouring estate for some 70 years, and Lady Marguerite had instructed him to resolve the boundary survey before the notification went out, in order, she had said, that her goddaughter inherit the place clean and not the place fashionable. The survey had concluded in February. The notification had been sent at the end of the month. He hoped Miss Davenport would forgive the additional delay and reply at her earliest convenience. The neighbouring estate was Westmore Park. Verity read the letter 3 times. The first time for the facts, the second time for the language, the third time for the woman behind it. It was nearly midnight by then. She had heard her aunt cease to weep in the small parlour an hour before, and she had heard the housemaid put the candles out, and she had heard the clock in the hall strike 11. She lit a fresh candle. She closed the door. She read the letter once more. Lady Marguerite had hated the late Duke of Westmore, who had been Adrian's father. She had hated him for 40 years. The reason, as Verity remembered hearing it once half-told in a London drawing-room when she was 16, was that he had cut a piece of common ground from the Ravensden tenants in 1773 by a method that was technically legal and substantively dishonest, and Lady Marguerite had told him so to his face at Almack's, and he had laughed at her and never spoken to her again, and she had never once forgotten it. She had outlived him by 11 years. She had spent 10 of those years quietly buying back, parcel by parcel, every acre of the disputed common, and the 11th year drawing up a will that gave the whole of the estate to a young woman who had done nothing to deserve it, except be 21 and clear-eyed and, as Lady Marguerite had once written to her father, the only one of the family blood with any spine left worth investing in. Verity read the line again. She thought about the morning room. She thought about the curtsy. She thought about a man who had told her to know her worth, in the precise particular sense that he meant it, in front of his sister and her aunt. in a room with old silver and a cracked terrace flag, and had called it kindness. She thought about the boundary line. She did not weep. She did not write to her aunt. She did not that night write to anyone in Hawthorne County. She wrote 3 letters, one to her father in Manchester, one to Mr. Pemberton at Lincoln's Inn, and one to the bank in Bath, where her godmother had kept the household account. The letters were short, factual, and signed in her own clear hand. She sealed them. She set them on the corner of the desk for the morning post. The candle had burned low. She blew it out. The room went to the cold blue of the moon coming through the half-drawn curtain, and the silence of Mere Cottage settled around her with the same composed indifference it had carried all her life. She lay down. She did not sleep for a long time. The phrase he had used moved in her mind without rest. She turned it over, examined it, set it down, picked it up again. Know your worth. She thought very slowly that she would. April became May. She did not announce her inheritance in Hawthorne. She told her aunt once and briefly that she had received a notification regarding her godmother's estate, and that she would be travelling to Manchester to her father, and from Manchester to London, and that she would write when there was news worth writing. Her aunt, who had spent the days since the call at Westmore Park alternating between mortification and a martyred refusal to discuss the matter, accepted this with the relief of a woman granted reprieve from a subject she could not have raised again without coming undone. Verity went to Manchester at the beginning of May. Her father met her at the inn-yard in his everyday coat, with the soot of the dye shed still faintly on his cuffs, and he listened to her account of Mr. Pemberton's letter without once interrupting, and at the end of it he set down his cup and said, "You will need capital." "Yes, I have it. You will not borrow it. You will draw on it as a daughter, and you will pay no interest, and you will repay it in the manner of any other estate that comes into its rents, which is to say in time and by season. Are we agreed?" "We are agreed." "And the other matter?" She looked at him. He was 63. He had buried her mother 7 years earlier, and the grief of it had set in the corners of his face. But the eyes were unchanged, and the eyes were steady, and the eyes were waiting. "What other matter, father?" "The Duke." She did not answer immediately. She said, "He spoke to me as if I were a problem his sister had brought into the room, and he was its solution." "And what is your solution to him?" "To be his neighbour." He considered her over the rim of the cup. "That will be a long solution, Verity." "I have time." He nodded. He drank his tea. He did not raise the subject again. She was in London by the middle of May. She met Mr. Pemberton, who was 61 and tall, and had the dry, exact courtesy of a man who had practiced law for 40 years and married it. He took her through the will clause by clause. He took her through the surveys. He took her through the household accounts at Ravensden, which were thin but honest, and the rent rolls, which were fair to the tenants and underperforming to the estate. He took her through the legal mechanics of the title. The courtesy title, he explained, was not a peerage and was not heritable by marriage. It would be hers from the moment of legal possession. It would remain hers until she chose to set it down. "I do not anticipate setting it down, Mr. Pemberton." "I had not anticipated otherwise," he said. She returned to Manchester in June. She engaged a steward by the recommendation of her father's solicitor, a Mr. Jonathan Pendrake, late of the Royal Navy, who had served as a purser on a frigate in the Mediterranean for 9 years and had returned to land life with a wife and a slow, methodical temper and a contempt for waste that suited Verity exactly. She met him in a counting-house in Liverpool. She offered him the post in the 2nd hour of the conversation. He accepted in the 3rd. She visited Ravensden Manor for the first time in the last week of June. It was a stone house of 7 bays, built around an Elizabethan core, extended in 1718 and again, badly, in 1761. It sat on a low rise above the river, with the home farm to the south and the disputed common, now reincorporated, running northwards to the boundary that had been settled in February. The slate of the east roof was failing. 2 chimneys needed repointing. The kitchen garden was overgrown but not lost. The library had 1,100 volumes, 6 of them in incunable bindings, and the rest in the careful hands of a woman who had ordered books slowly all her life. The portrait of Lady Marguerite hung on the stair. She paused before it. She did not speak. She went on up. She slept in the south bedroom, which had been her godmother's, and rose before dawn and walked the boundary line in the wet of the meadow with Mr. Pendrake, and they did not say much, and at the end of it Mr. Pendrake said, "I can have it sound by Michaelmas, my lady, if the carpenters keep their word. Their word will be kept, Mr. Pendrake. We shall pay them on the day." He almost smiled. July passed in surveys, in letters, in fittings, in the careful selection of the household. She engaged a housekeeper in Bristol, 2 upper servants in Bath, a cook in Wells. She wrote to no one in Hawthorne but her aunt, and to her aunt only on practical matters. The Westmore Park people heard, by the indirect channels of country gossip, that Lady Marguerite's estate had passed to a relation of the family, and the relation was a young woman, and the young woman was understood to be from Manchester. The Duke heard this in the same form as the rest of the county. He did not connect it with the morning room. Verity took possession of Ravensden on the 24th of August, which was a Tuesday, and the day was clear, and the sun was high, and the carriage came up the avenue between the limes that her godmother had planted in 1781, and Mr. Pendrake stood at the door, and the housekeeper stood beside him, and the 2 upper servants behind them, and the bell of the village church, by Mr. Pendrake's quiet arrangement and by the rector's old friendship with Lady Marguerite, rang once in welcome. She stepped down from the carriage. She put her hand on the gate-post. She said to no one in particular, "Good morning." She went into her house. The autumn assembly at Hawthorne Village Hall was held that year on the 2nd Friday of October. It was the first considerable gathering of the season, and the county arrived in the customary order. The established families first, the visiting cousins next, the new arrivals last. There were not many new arrivals in Hawthorne in any given year. There was that October exactly 1. Verity arrived at 8:15, accompanied by Mrs. Pendrake, who was the steward's wife, a calm, comfortable woman of 44, who had decided some weeks ago that her duty toward her young mistress would be performed with the unobtrusive thoroughness she brought to everything, and who was, that evening, exactly 2 paces behind her at the door. Verity wore dark green. The dress had been cut in London by a woman who understood that dark green on this particular pale skin, and these particular black coffee eyes, was not a fashion choice but a fact, and she wore her godmother's pearls, which were old, fine, and had not been seen in Hawthorne since 1798. She gave her name at the door as Lady Verity of Ravensden, in the steady, neutral voice of a woman stating a thing she had no intention of explaining, and the steward of the assembly, who had been advised by the rector that this was correct, repeated the name into the room in the tone reserved for the names that mattered, and the room turned to look. Aunt Felicity, who had been told 3 days earlier and 3 times in 3 different keys, and who had come to terms with it by deciding, against the evidence of 40 years of acquaintance, that she had foreseen this outcome from the beginning, was on her feet near the punch table, rearranging her shawl with the suppressed energy of a woman who had been waiting all evening to be seen with her niece. She crossed the room. She kissed Verity on the cheek with the maternal authority she had not earned, and said loudly that her dear Verity must promise not to neglect her old aunt now that her circumstances were so altered. Verity returned the embrace without comment. Aunt Felicity, satisfied, drifted off to communicate the embrace to several other groups in turn. Lady Honor Westmore arrived 7 minutes later. She crossed the room directly. She did not pretend that she had not been looking for Verity since she came through the door. She offered her hand, and the hand was steady, and she said, in the low, clear voice that was her usual register, "Lady Verity, will you let me say one thing to you before the evening properly begins? Lady Honor, what my brother said in April was indefensible. I told him so the same evening, and I have told him so several times since, in a manner he has not been permitted to forget. He has not asked me to deliver any apology to you, and I would not deliver one if he had, because the apology, if it is worth offering, must be his to make and yours to receive on whatever terms you set. I say only that I knew the words were wrong while he was speaking them, and I say it because I would not have you believe that this house thinks as one in the matter." Verity looked at her. She thought distantly that she liked Lady Honor very much, and that she had not yet decided what to do with that fact, and that she would not decide it tonight. "I thank you, Lady Honor. The words were yours, and they were generous. We shall let them stand." Lady Honor inclined her head. She did not press. She turned the conversation deliberately to the assembly, to the season, to a small piece of inconsequential gossip about the rector's new spaniel, and the formality between them eased into something workable. They were standing together on the edge of the dance floor when the Duke arrived. He came in at 9:30 alone, with the brief, courteous nod he gave to such rooms. and the steward's announcement of his name made the same dull thunder it always made in such rooms, and he moved through the first wave of greetings with the composed economy of a man who had done it for 10 years. He saw her. He did not see her gradually. He saw her in the single instant that the crowd parted on his left, and the candlelight fell across the dark green and the pearls and the line of her shoulder, and he stopped where he stood. The stop was perhaps a quarter of a second. It might have been nothing at all to anyone not watching. Lady Honor was watching. Lady Honor said very softly, "Yes, Adrian, that is who you think it is." He came across the room. He came neither hurrying nor delaying. He came at the pace of a man who had decided some seconds earlier that an introduction must be made, and had set himself to make it, and was not prepared to be intercepted on the way. He bowed. "Lady Honor, madam?" A slight pause. "I do not believe I have had the pleasure." "Adrian," Lady Honor said with the particular stillness of a sister presiding over a moment she intended her brother to remember, "may I present Lady Verity of Ravensden Manor, Lady Verity, my brother, the Duke of Westmore." Verity inclined her head. She did not curtsy. The inclination was correct, was civil, was within the precise allowance for one peer equivalent acknowledging another at a county assembly, and it was so exactly correct that the absence of the curtsy was its own statement, and the Duke received the statement with the entirety of the attention he had failed to give her in April. "Lady Verity," he said, "Your Grace, my sister has been telling me about Ravensden. The estate is a noble one." "The estate is mine," she said. "I am content with it." He held her eyes, she held his. The silence between them was perhaps 3 seconds long, and it was the silence of two people both deciding that this was not the place for the conversation they were going to have. "I had heard," he said carefully, "that my late father and Lady Marguerite Ashmore were not on terms." They were not. I should not wish that history to govern the dealings between Westmore and Ravensden, nor should I. Histories ought to govern the people who made them, and ought to have the courtesy to die with them when they are done. A small pause. "That is well said, Lady Verity. It is the truth, Your Grace. The form is incidental." She turned very slightly toward Lady Honor. She made a remark about the music. The remark was an exit. He understood it as an exit. He inclined his head, accepted it, withdrew with the grace of a man who had been told, civilly and at the cost of nothing further, that he was not to receive the remainder of the evening. She did not look at him again until she left at 11:30, and when she looked at him, then it was because Lady Honor was kissing her at the door, and he was 3 yards beyond his sister, watching, with the expression of a man who had decided some hours ago that he would be at her gate within the week, and was now revising the deadline downwards. She inclined her head once more. She went out into the cold air. The carriage was waiting. Mrs. Pendrake handed her up. The horses moved off down the lane towards the river road, and the assembly hall fell back into its yellow light, and the night took the rest of it. She did not weep. She did not laugh. She thought with the careful neutrality of a woman who had just executed the centre movement of a long plan that the second half would require more of her than the first, and would also be the part she would remember. He came on the Tuesday. He came alone. He came on horseback, which was of itself a piece of language. A duke calling on a neighbour by carriage was a duke making a formal visit. A duke calling on horseback was a man asking to be received as a man and willing to be turned away with no formal damage to either party if he was. Mr. Pendrake, who had been advised by his mistress on the Monday evening that the duke might call within the week, met him at the gate without surprise and said, "Lady Verity is in the library, Your Grace, if you will follow me." He followed. He noted, as he passed, that the avenue had been pruned, that the south chimney was in fresh mortar, that the limes were holding their leaves a fortnight longer than the limes at Westmore. He had not previously known whether Ravensden was sound. He saw in the 8 minutes between the gate and the door that it was sound and would be more so, and that the woman whose hand had been on every visible repair had taken possession of the place with the same calm thoroughness she had brought to the curtsy in April. Mr. Pendrake announced him. He came in. The library at Ravensden faced east. The morning light fell across the long table, and across the desk in the window, and across the woman at the desk, who set down her pen as he entered, and stood with the unhurried courtesy due a guest of his rank. "Your Grace." "Lady Verity." He bowed. "I beg your pardon for calling without an appointment." "You are at no disadvantage, Your Grace. Mr. Pendrake had already been instructed to admit you should you come." A small pause. I had not assumed I would be admitted. You came on horseback. The horseback signified, will you sit? He sat. She sat. She did not ring for tea. The absence of tea was a piece of language too. He acknowledged it with a slight inclination of his head, and did not protest. Lady Verity, I have come to discuss the boundary surveys. I understood as much from your steward's letter on Monday. There is no dispute in the surveys. There is not. They were settled in February by Mr. Pemberton and your father's late factor, and the disputed common is unambiguously within Ravensden as it has been since the original grant of 1672, before whatever arrangements your great-grandfather made with mine, and I do not propose to reopen the matter. I do not propose to reopen it either. Then we are agreed about the boundary. We are. Was there another matter? He looked at her across the desk. He had come prepared with 5 different ways of approaching the second subject, and 3 of them had survived the ride from Westmore, and 1 of them had survived Mr. Pendrake's silent escort up the drive, and that one was now, in the steady morning light of the Ravensden library, dissolving in the simple and uncomplicated weather of her gaze. He said, I owe you an apology, Lady Verity. For what, Your Grace? The question was not rhetorical. She was not going to assist him. He took a breath. He set his hands on the arms of the chair. For what I said in the morning room at Westmore Park on the 17th of April this year, specifically for the words, know your worth, and the construction I built around them. I spoke from a position I had decided in advance and brought into the room. I did not address what was in front of me. I addressed what I had concluded was in front of me before I sat down. The two are not the same. The first is a man performing his rank. The second is a man behaving as a guest. I performed my rank. I owe you an apology for it. I make it now without qualification, and I do not ask you to receive it in any particular spirit, only to know that it has been made. She did not answer at once. She looked at the surface of the desk. There was a folded note on it from Mr. Pendrake about the slate of the east roof. There was an inkwell that had been her godmother's. There was a paperweight that had been her father's, brass and round, the weight of £1 exactly. She said, Thank you, Your Grace. The apology is made and noted. Lady Verity, forgiveness is not in my gift today. I do not say this in unkindness. I say it because I know what forgiveness costs and what it offers, and I will not give either lightly, and I will not give either before its time. The apology is sound. I receive it as an apology. We shall see in time what else can be built on it. We shall not be hurried, Your Grace, in either direction. He held her gaze. He inclined his head. That is more than I had any right to ask for, Lady Verity, and exactly the answer I would have asked for if I had been honest enough to know what I deserved. You are doing better than you were in April, Your Grace. I am trying. Try with the road bill. Try with the tenants. Try with your sister, who tells me you have been tolerably civil since the Assembly, and will be more so if she has anything to do with it. The personal trial will keep. The practical trials are what we are governed by, and the practical trials show me clearly enough what a man is. She rose. He rose with her. Thank you for your call, Your Grace. Thank you for receiving me, Lady Verity. She walked him to the door of the library. She did not walk him further. She returned to the desk. She picked up the pen. She heard from the window the sound of his horse coming round on the gravel, and the voice of Mr. Pendrake giving him good day, and the hoofs moving off down the avenue at the steady walk of a man who was not in a hurry to be away. She went to the window. She watched the line of his back disappear between the limes. Mr. Pendrake came to the library door behind her. All well, my lady? All well, Mr. Pendrake. The man is going to be a useful neighbour. Useful, my lady. She thought about the word. In time, Mr. Pendrake. In time. She went back to the desk. She wrote the next letter. The morning continued in its quiet way. The light on the lawn moved by degrees toward noon. Somewhere in the south orchard, the gardener was beating apples down with a long pole, and the apples were striking the ground with the small, dull sound of a season ending well. Winter came early in Hawthorne that year. By the first week of December, the river had skinned with ice along the shallows, and the road from Ravensden to Westmore lay hard under the frost, and the woods between them stood in the still grey patience of trees that had completed their work for the year and were content to wait. She had seen him 3 times in the 8 weeks since the call. Once at the road bill committee in the village, where he had taken the seat opposite hers, and had listened to her arguments about the tenant cottages in the lower meadow, and had revised his position on the cottages publicly within 10 minutes, and had thanked her for the correction with the brevity of a man who knew that elaborate thanks would mean less than the revision itself. Once at a charity collection at the rectory, where they had stood within 10 feet of one another for an hour, and had exchanged precisely 4 sentences, and had each contributed substantially more to the collection than the rector had thought to ask for. Once on the road itself, at a chance meeting by the gatehouse of a neighbouring farm, where she had been on horseback and he had been on foot, and they had spoken for perhaps 3 minutes about a tenant matter which was not properly either of theirs, and which they had each been investigating for the satisfaction of investigating. He had written her 4 letters. The letters were short, factual, and signed with his name. They concerned a drainage question on the boundary, a recommendation for a wheelwright in the next county, an inquiry on his sister's behalf regarding a book Verity had mentioned at the assembly, and in the 4th, a request that he be permitted to send across to Ravensden the loan of the volumes of reports from the Board of Agriculture for 1808 and 1809, which she had noted she was missing. She had answered each letter. The answers had been the same length as the letters and signed with the same plain hand. The volumes had arrived on a Friday with a note that said, "I shall not require them again. They are with the rest of your library now. W." The W was new. She had set the note in the drawer with her godmother's letters, where she kept the small things that mattered, and she had not referred to it again. She invited him formally on the 2nd of December. The dinner at Ravensden was small, 7 persons. The rector and his wife, who had loved her godmother and accepted her as her godmother's heir without further inquiry. A barrister from London who had been her godmother's friend for 30 years, and who had come down for the season at her invitation. Lady Honor Westmore, who had suspected the dinner was coming, and had ensured by various small means that her brother was free that evening. The Duke himself. Mr. Pendrake's wife, in the ordinary capacity of a senior household member, and who had been instructed to seat herself opposite the rector and to speak whenever speech was useful. And Verity. She wore dark grey that evening. The grey was a different language from the green at the assembly. The grey said, "This is my house, and I am at home in it." The Duke read the language correctly. He said nothing about it. He spoke at dinner with the easy precision he had brought to every interaction since October. He did not address her once across the table. He did not require to. They were at opposite ends of a table for 7, and the conversation moved among them all in the reasonable equal weather of a country dinner, and he was, several times, made to laugh by the barrister, and he laughed without fuss and without performance, and Lady Honor noted this and did not look at her brother when she noted it. After dinner, the rector and his wife retired to the drawing-room, the barrister with them. Lady Honor said she would join them in a moment. Mrs. Pendrake found a household errand. The library, by the small choreography of a hostess who had decided this was the night, contained by 10:30 only herself and the Duke. The fire had been built up. The candles were lit. The volumes of the Board of Agriculture stood on the shelf where she had placed them, with their old dark red bindings, and the new ones beside them. Snow had begun to fall outside the long window. She did not sit. He did not sit. He said, "Lady Verity." She turned. "I want to ask you something. I have prepared the asking carefully because I do not want to mistake the answer when it comes. I will not be offended whatever you say. I do not wish you to soften the answer for me. Ask, Your Grace." He took a breath. "I should like to court you, not in the manner of a man seeking a duchess for Westmore, although that, I imagine, would also be the consequence if you were to give the courtship its end. Not in the manner of an apology I am extending to its natural conclusion, which would be condescending to us both. I should like to court you because in 8 months I have come to understand, slowly and against the weight of much that I had thought I knew, that I would prefer the rest of my life with you in it to the rest of my life without you in it, and that this preference has nothing to do with land or rank or convenience, and is in fact inconvenient to all 3. I should like permission to address you, not as your neighbour, not as the man who once spoke to you very poorly in his sister's morning room, but as myself. If the permission is not to be given, I shall accept the refusal entirely, and we shall remain on whatever terms you choose, neighbours and acquaintances. I make no condition, and I lay no expectation. I ask only the permission." She did not answer at once. She walked to the window. The snow was falling steadily now in the soft, heavy flakes that meant a real snow. The lawn was already pale. The limes stood dark against the grey. She thought about the morning room in April. She thought about the curtsy. She thought about the letter at midnight and the line in it that her godmother had written about her father's family, and the slow, certain months of building, and a man on a grey horse at a boundary line, and a man on foot at a gatehouse, and a man who had set his hands on the arms of a chair and apologized without qualification, and the volumes in their old dark red bindings on the shelf. She thought finally about her own worth. She thought about the way she had earned it, and the way she had been told she did not have it, and the way she had taken the telling and made of it the year that was now ending in the snow outside her window. She turned from the window. "You may write to me, Your Grace, as yourself, once a week for a year. The letters will be answered. We shall see what we both are at the end of it. At the end of it we shall sit in this library again, and we shall discuss whatever is then to be discussed, and whatever is decided then will be decided by both of us together with the full weight of 12 months' evidence behind it. In the meantime you will not press, and I shall not promise, and the courtship, if it deserves the name, will be conducted as you and I conduct everything else, which is by the practical trial of weeks and weather and work." He stood very still. He said, "I accept the terms entirely, Lady Verity. They are more generous than I had hoped for, and exactly what I should have expected of you. Good night, Your Grace." "Good night, Lady Verity." He bowed. She inclined her head. He turned, walked the length of the library, and went out through the door into the hall, where Lady Honour was waiting for him with the carriage already brought round, and the rector and the barrister taking their leave at the same hour, and the household settling into the last quiet of the evening. She stood at the window after he had gone. The carriage moved off down the avenue between the limes. The snow had thickened. The lamps of the carriage were a small yellow point that moved away and was lost between the trees. The clock in the hall struck 11. Mr. Pendrake came in to ask whether anything more was needed, and she said, "Nothing tonight, Mr. Pendrake, thank you. Please give my thanks to your wife." He withdrew. She stood a while longer. She did not yet know what she would conclude in 12 months. She did not yet know what the letters would say, or how the weeks of weather and work would weigh, or what she would decide on the December evening of the year to come, in this same library, with this same man across the room. She knew only that the question had been asked properly, and the answer had been given properly, and that what came next would be earned by both of them, or by neither. She thought of the line in April. She thought of it without bitterness now, which was new, and without sentiment either, which was older. She knew her worth. She had known it that morning at the inn door, and at the desk by the cold candle, and at the gate with Mr. Pendrake on the August Tuesday, and at the door of the assembly hall in the dark green dress, and in this room twice over, once when he had apologized in October, and once tonight when he had asked. She had always known it. It was the rest of the world that had needed the year to catch up. She blew out the candles in the library, one by one at her own pace. She closed the door behind her. She went up the stairs to her room, and the snow continued to fall in the dark beyond her window, and the year, with all that had been earned in it, and all that had not yet been answered, lay quiet around her. And she slept.
200 voices, and she made no sound. Ooh. The candles burned too hot that night. He catalogued the exits 3. 7 years of ballroom walls, and not one face had made him see. Beautiful and cold as marble, standing where he couldn't feel, until the edge of his own vision caught the one thing that was real. Not silk and diamonds, not a laugh, not a woman performing grace. A girl alone beside a window, pressing her knuckle to her face. She cried so quiet no one heard her. She'd learned that no one ever came. But he crossed the room in all his coldness and asked her something all the same. The girl by the window, the man who built his walls, it accumulated quietly. the way that true love falls. Ooh, the girl by the window. She knew him, impossibly handsome, entirely hopeless. Dorothy's words, but his eyes were the most awake she'd seen, and he stayed when others hadn't stirred. He brought her books and botanical prints, because she'd mentioned Hertfordshire before. That word she never did elaborate, that border she had built around her door. Thomas said, "You are courting her." "I am calling," he replied. 9 visits in 3 weeks of autumn, and still he hadn't said what burned inside. She learned that no one stays for long. He learned that feeling makes you blind. But in a morning room with rain on the windows, he put the formal language behind. The girl by the window, the man who stopped pretending. Please don't disqualify yourself for me. I know what I am intending. Ooh, the girl by the window. "I am not good at letting things show," he said, while the rain did its work on the glass. "What I feel toward you is not pity, not novelty. It arrived quietly. It did not announce itself. It simply accumulated, the way things do when they are true." And she looked at her hands and at the rain and at him, and she let him see. The girl by the window finally spoke. "I'm afraid to," and so was he. But he said, "Don't disqualify yourself. I am capable of what I need." And something moved across her face, almost laughter, almost tears, the expression of a person receiving what she'd stopped expecting for years. "All right," she said, "yes." The girl by the window finally came home. Ooh. London rain on the glass, 2 people at a window now. It accumulated quietly, the way things do when they are true.